Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the first meeting for the Region of Waterloo's 2021 budget process. My name is Sean Strickland. I'm Budget Chair and Chair of Administration and Finance. It's my pleasure to chair the proceedings for the next few weeks as we work towards a 2021 budget. I'd like to welcome everyone to our electronic budget committee meeting today. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, Regional Council is practicing physical distancing and the majority of councillors are participating electronically. Myself and Chair Redman are in the chambers. In an attempt to move things along, we have pre-assigned a mover and a seconder for any motions. I will read these out. I will then state the result of the vote. So to kick things off, we'll ask the clerk to do roll call.
Thank you. Councillor Jowett.
Here.
Councillor Armstrong.
Here.
Councillor Erb.
Here.
Councillor Foxton.
Present.
Councillor Galloway.
Here.
Councillor Harris. Councillor Jaworski.
Here.
Councillor Kiefer.
Here.
Councillor Lawrence.
Here.
Councillor McGarry.
Present.
Councillor Nowak.
Present.
Councillor Shantz.
Here.
Councillor Verbanovic. Councillor Clark.
Here.
Regional Chair Redman. Here. Councillor Strickland.
Here.
I'll call back for Councillor Harris. Councillor Verbanovic. So the meeting is starting. We have Councillor Harris and Councillor Verbanovic not currently present.
Madam Clerk, Councillor Harris did send me a text. He said he had to step out for 20 minutes or so, so he will be rejoining the meeting. Okay, thank you. So we'll reconvene into open session. A motion moved by Councillor Armstrong, seconded by Councillor Clark. If you could vote using the yes or no tab on your screen. Chair Redman's voted affirmative in the chamber. Okay, that's carried. Thank you very much. Any declarations of pecuniary interest? Seeing none. Okay. So in thinking about my opening remarks for today, you know, often I talk about the challenges we're facing in any particular budget year, and it would be an understatement to say this year is going to be more challenging than most. We've all experienced a year like no other, and our budget will have some challenges and some issues that we're going to need to deal with to reflect some of those challenges that we've experienced due to COVID-19. But throughout it all, I think that council and public will see that we will remain true to our values. We're committed to supporting our community to grow and prosper, and committed to looking after those who are most vulnerable in our community as well. And we've also seen and experienced some real painful and impactful issues in our community that have been exacerbated by the pandemic. So we've worked hard to deal with affordable housing. That challenge has become more evident through a pandemic. Shelters and providing accommodation for the homeless. The opioid crisis are some challenges that have been exacerbated by the pandemic, and throughout it all, we will continue to do what we can as a caring region to look after those that are most vulnerable. I think it's also important to recognize the great work that our public health staff has done here in the region of Waterloo with the leadership of Dr. Wong, and bringing on dozens of new staff to help deal with the community requirements for the pandemic, the new paramedics that we've hired. So a big shout out to our public health staff for the exemplary work that they're doing in what is indeed unprecedented times. Our transit system has experienced a decline in revenue that no one could have predicted, and a decline in ridership that no one could have predicted, and that's creating some challenges on our operating, and so that is something we're going to have to work with as well. And then also, outside of the challenges that we're experiencing as a corporation in the region, I think we're all very much aware of the challenges that people in our local economy are experiencing, particularly those in the restaurant and hospitality and entertainment industry who have been absolutely devastated by the impacts of COVID. And, we really miss that aspect of our lives and what these restaurants and entertainment and places of public gathering, the quality of life that it really brings to our community, and certainly very much aware of the economic hardship that many people in our community are experiencing. So when I reflect on the challenges that we have with this budget, I think that it's also fair to say that with these challenges create some opportunities. So we have an opportunity to craft a budget that is focused. We have an opportunity to craft a budget that is prioritized and looks at some of these issues that are of a higher priority. It's even more important now than ever that I believe that government can't be all things to all people as much as there's an expectation that we can be. I think the times dictate that we need to have this focus and priority setting, and also that is sustainable. We have a challenge for this year's budget for sure, but we also have an opportunity to create a sustainable budget that will help pave the way for future budgets that will continue to invest in our community. And I'd also like to say, and I'd like to thank my colleagues and the leadership of Chair Redman, that we're not just coming into this budget right now unprepared. As soon as the pandemic hit, we made changes. We made changes operationally. We made changes on our capital spending side. We made adjustments to reflect the new economic reality. We have a strong strategic plan. We have a strong balance sheet. And years ago, I remember many of my colleagues when we first established the Tax Rate Stabilization Fund, the kind of proverbial rainy day fund. And we're going to be using some of that money that we put aside over the years to help us with this budget and help our citizens through the pandemic. Also, the service review. This is an exercise we undertook some 18 months ago to help position ourselves and prioritize regional programs that is really going to be put into effect and up for discussion as we go through the budget deliberations, which again also helps us focus on delivering the right kind of programs for our community. So I wouldn't say looking forward. I would say that I'm anxious and anticipatory about working through this budget process, also recognizing that it's going to be on Zoom, which is going to be a first for all of us. It's going to be a challenge to, read the dynamic in the room. We're all in here together. There's a sense of pulling together when we're in the room, we're in their council chambers. But on Zoom, it's a little bit disconnected. But I'm sure that we're going to be able to all work through this and deliver a budget at the end of the day we're all going to be proud of, given the circumstances that we're dealing with. I'd also, before I turn over to Chair Redman, I'd like to make a few comments. I'd also like to thank staff for the great work that they've done so far. We've taken a few steps along this journey for 2021 budget, but you will see from the presentations today there's been much thought put into our budget for next year, and staff have done a great job of taking the direction from council and establishing a target of a 0% tax rate increase, which is a target, admittedly, but staff have given us a good document starting today to have these discussions as we craft a good and sustainable budget for 2021. So my thanks to staff. I look forward to working with all of you as we work through this process and deliver the budget. With that, I'd like to ask Chair Redman to make a couple of comments.
Thank you, Chair Strickland. 2020 has been a year like no other. And, I've heard the analogy often during the pandemic that we're all in the same storm but in different boats. 600,000 people from across our community have been impacted by COVID-19, some more than others. Single parents, small business owners, members of our BIPOC community, and those struggling to find an affordable place to call home. Yes, it's been difficult. It's been an unpredictable year, but not everything has changed. We're still a caring region. We're still a community that takes pride in making decisions for the future and ensuring that we're prepared for whatever lies ahead. We're also a community that listens. And in 2020, we've heard our residents loud and clear. They've told us we need to shift. They've told us they want a plan for our entire community. They've told us that you want to see taxpayers' dollars benefit all corners of Waterloo region, not just certain postal codes. So what you'll see in the plan in our budget today is a deliberate and intentional approach. On top of driving forward with providing critical services such as clean water, transit, and public health, we're also focusing further on supporting our most vulnerable, on addressing inequities in our community, and ongoing management of the COVID-19 pandemic. This is a year like no other. There is neither the time nor the tolerance for a status quo. It is time for leadership at the Regional Council, time for us to stand up to make tough decisions to move our community forward and beyond COVID-19, equitably and sustainably. And like Chair Strickland, I want to thank the forward-thinking and dedicated regional staff for moving outside of the box as you've prepared this budget. Thank you to Councillor Strickland for his leadership through this process, and I too look forward to finding the opportunities amongst these tough decisions as we go forward on behalf of our 600,000 residents. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair Redman. Mr. Lauckner?
Thank you, Chair Strickland, through you. Really want to express my thanks to Council for the clear guidance that you gave us as staff in terms of September and the direction you gave us then. There's nothing worse than trying to build a budget and guessing what your council wants or what residents need. So that clarity was really helpful. I also want to reflect on the time when you were interviewing me, and as I came into the organization, I had the opportunity to meet with each councillor independently. And you all gave me input into what you thought was important. But the one consistent theme was it's about the people, Bruce. It's about all 600,000 residents. And it's about our urban residents. It's about our rural residents. It's about our wealthy residents. It's about our residents who are struggling. And it's about everyone. And that's the thing that I've carried near and dear to my heart ever since I began this job, that it's about everyone. It's about dealing with the impacts of COVID, which meant more investment in public health, and we'll continue that through the next year. It means more investment in paramedic services to keep our people safe. It's also about keeping existing services going and helping us come through the pandemic stronger than ever. And that includes, as Chair Strickland and Chair Redman said, dealing with those challenges that existed in our community far before COVID. And really, we have a big flashlight, if you will, shining on those challenges and exposing them for what they are. So we appreciate the guidance that Council gave us to keep going and deliver services in a growing community. That means more services. And there's not endless amounts of money, as Chair Strickland said, so that means innovation. It's about addressing inequalities in our community. It's about helping our businesses get through to the other side stronger than they would if we didn't take action, and helping our most vulnerable. And some have said to me, there's no possible way you can address all those things. There's too many tensions between them, too many trade-offs. And we said, yeah, that's tough, but it's doable. And I'm super proud of every member of this staff team who dug down deep and really recognized that our residents need leadership more now than ever before. And leadership comes in so many different forms. It's not just about, the fancy title that I have on my door. It's every single member of this team digging down and saying we can do better and we can do differently. So I hope that you'll see through the presentation today the really intentional thought. It may not come across in just the slide decks in a few words, but know behind every slide deck or every word is literally hundreds of hours of thinking from all levels of the organization to come back and try to meet the needs that you requested us back in September to reflect what our community is asking for us. Your insights today are going to be invaluable. As Chair Strickland said, this is the beginning of a process, and we'll reflect on your insights today and come back with any changes for the next budget meeting. And with that, back to you, Chair Strickland. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Bruce, and thanks for your leadership as well. I know this is just the beginning of the process. So what's going to happen today is, first of all, there's going to be no decisions made today in keeping with our protocols for budgets discussion. There were no decisions today, lots of questions. Ask for questions of clarification, ask staff for additional information, and they will bring it back to a subsequent meeting. We're going to look at user rates today. We have a guest presentation from the GRCA, and then from there we'll get into the tax the tax-supported operating budget for the region of Waterloo. So with that, let's get started. Mr. Dyer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and welcome to Council to the 2021 budget process. We're going to spend some time over the next little while to talk about the proposed 2021 user rate operating budgets and capital programs. And of course, when we refer to user rates, we're referring to our water and wastewater services provided through the Water Services Division here at the region of Waterloo. And so we have three separate presentations today to go through. We're going to start off with I'll say the annual presentation from the Grand River Conservation Authority, an overview of the water and wastewater budgets from our Director of Water Services, Nancy Kodousek. And then I have some concluding slides with respect to both the water supply, the wholesale water and wastewater budgets and the retail water and wastewater budgets. Those slides were included as appendices to the staff reports that were sent out late last week. So I'll go through those after the presentation from the GRCA and from Water Services. So I would at this point like to welcome and introduce Samantha Lawson, the CAO of the Grand River Conservation Authority, to provide an update on what has been a rather eventful couple of weeks at the Grand River Conservation Authority.
Thanks, Craig, and welcome, Samantha.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity today to present the GRCA's draft 2021 budget. I'd just also like to thank Chair Jowett and the other regional councillors that sit on our board for their support and continued guidance through this year. It's been an interesting and challenging one, to say the least. So on the first slide, can't see the slides. So we can't see the presentation. I don't know if it's, oh, there we go. Oh, wonderful. Thank you. Okay, so the Grand River watershed is the largest in Southern Ontario. The Grand River and its tributaries lie at one of the heart of the richest and fastest growing regions in our province.
Next one.
And the next one. Perfect. The region of Waterloo is a vital part of the Grand River watershed. We know that the future prosperity of the watershed, its municipalities, and communities are linked to the health of the river, its tributaries, and the natural environment. The Grand River watershed faces important and evolving challenges. Okay, next slide. Our water management plan addresses the management of surface and groundwater resources in the watershed and identifies three main challenges as we move through the next few decades: population growth, balancing extensive agriculture within our watershed demands, and climate change. With these pressures of increasing population, more frequent and extreme weather events, the intensification of agricultural practices, a holistic watershed-wide approach to managing water resources and natural hazards is needed to ensure our communities thrive and continue to grow in balance with the natural environment. Next slide. The Grand River Conservation Authority operates a range of programs in engineering, planning, land management, recreation, and education. Our strategic mandate is to develop and implement watershed-based programs that protect people and property from flooding and erosion, improve the health of the watershed, connect people to the environment, and manage our land holdings in a responsible and sustainable way. Our programs balance human, environmental, and economic needs so that we can deliver on our vision of a healthy watershed now and for future generations. We build relationships and trust with our watershed partners to achieve a common goal. Next slide, please. Warmer air and water temperatures, bigger rainstorms, longer periods of drought are all consequences of climate change. This poses new challenges in managing floods, improving water quality, and securing water supplies for municipalities, farmers, industry, and the natural environment. The GRCA owns and operates 7 large multi-purpose dams and reservoirs. These dams are actively used year-round to manage river flows and were built to work as a system to address frequent and severe flooding, extreme low summer river flows, and challenges with water quality. Slide. Through a memorandum of understanding with the region, the GRCA provides technical advice on planning applications and other planning documents. Next. The primary objective of the Source Water Protection Program is protecting drinking water sources from contamination and depletion. There is ongoing work to update source water protection plans where new information becomes available. The Grand River Source Protection Plan is updated frequently to reflect changes in the Waterloo region. The most recent update that came into effect was October 1st, 2020, and is currently under review with MECP. Lake Erie Regional Source Protection staff support the plan's implementation through regular municipal implementation working group meetings and one-on-one collaboration. Next slide, please. The GRCA's watershed-wide wastewater optimization program promotes data-based decision-making and operational practices to achieve performance targets that go beyond compliance. This allows municipalities to better understand the capability and capacity of their facilities and to get the most out of these important assets. Recently, several regional plans, including the Heidelberg, Ayr, Conestoga, Elmira, St. Jacobs, and Preston, were recognized for their work as part of the program. The GRCA has been providing advice as a subject matter expert to the region's updates to the operating procedures and protocols for the Hidden Valley surface water intake for the Mannheim water treatment plant. Next slide. The GRCA delivers a voluntary rural water quality program on behalf of the 6 upper-tier municipalities in the watershed to help farmers implement best practices to improve and protect surface and groundwater quality. Each program is locally developed with input from the farming community, and variations in grant rates and eligible projects are tailored to reflect the local priorities and budgets. Since 1998, almost 7,000 projects have been completed with 20 million in grants and more than 56 million invested by municipalities and landowners. Next slide. Just last week, the region approved the extension of the Rural Water Quality Program for a further 5 years to end in 2025. Thank you very much. The region's $5.75 million contribution to the program since 1998 has resulted in approximately 1,900 projects with $19.8 million invested in Waterloo region. This investment supports the rural economy and source water protection. It builds green infrastructure and climate change resiliency on the landscape. And it also helps to improve the quality of the Grand River. Next slide. We know that spending time in nature has a positive effect on people's physical and mental health. At the GRCA, we connect people with the natural environment by providing environmental education programs and access to outdoor spaces. A vital part of the watershed's recreational infrastructure, our conservation areas host over 1 million visitors a year and are an important part of the local economy. Paying property taxes, hiring local staff, and supporting the vibrant tourism industry in our communities. Next slide, please. With increased population, the demand for access to GRCA land has increased. Natural areas, especially near our urban centers, are experiencing a significant increase in public use. We are developing management plans for these areas to help identify both environmentally significant areas and areas where it's suitable for public access. We also enter into agreements with our municipal partners to help facilitate recreation within their communities. For the second half of the presentation, I'm going to now pass it over to Sonia Radoja, who is our Manager of Corporate Services.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for allowing us to present our budget today. We brought the first draft of our budget to the board back in September, and the 2 main challenges that we've identified in going through our process this year was to initially consider the provincial regulations regarding mandatory and non-mandatory programs for conservation authorities. And this whole issue has been punctuated recently with the budget that is being drafted and going to be approved by the provincial government. And the other challenge we're looking at is just how to manage COVID and the impact that it has on our operations. Next slide. In terms of the first issue with regards to the new legislation, what we are going to assume is that the current method of requesting municipal levy will continue for 2021. And it does look like that is a reasonable assumption to make, given that there is talk of phasing in those regulations and a transitional period that would apply and not impact our budget till at least maybe 2022. So, and these new regulations that would accompany the legislation are anticipated to be out maybe before the end of this year or early in 2021. Next slide. Sorry, back one slide. In terms of managing COVID, where we found ourselves most significantly impacted in this past year was on our conservation areas due to the delay in when we opened our parks, due to some of the restrictions of the activities that we had to do. Sorry, I'm on the next slide, yes. And so we had significant impact on revenue. We budgeted for about $9 million and we're maybe going to come in around $6 million, and we're putting about $7 million in the 2021 budget. The other program that significantly impacted was outdoor education. We ceased delivering that program back in May, and we have still not recommenced delivering the Nature Center program to the schools and to the public. We certainly have had some incremental costs related to managing COVID, but we are hoping that those costs, real incremental costs, are being offset by administrative expenses where possible. So we're looking at an offset in our budget for those two types of costs. One thing that weren't impacted heavily that we anticipated was potentially planning income, but that has remained, our planning and permit review revenue, that has remained steady with last year and slightly even in excess. And also all our property rental incomes have to date not been impacted by COVID. Next slide. This simply serves to show the relative size of our overall budget of about 31 million, and that over 80% is our operating budget, and then our capital is about 10 and special projects about 5. I expect that the budget will increase by the time it's finalized in February, especially around the area of special projects. We wait sort of till next year to see what new projects are coming on, and they're funded with separate external funding. Next slide. So as I mentioned, the operating budget's about 80%, which translates to about 25 million. And Sam had spoke to the various programs that we offer. Next slide. The capital budget sits at about just under 4 million, mainly between our capital maintenance of our flood control structures, our conservation areas, capital projects. And these are also sort of moving targets. Often if there has been this year delays in some work, that they might be spill over a bit into next year's budget and will be adjusted accordingly, but should not impact any requests for levy in terms of adjustments to these budgets. Next slide. And as I mentioned, special projects will increase probably by the time this is done, and that we rely on external funding sources for these projects. So again, it should not impact any request for general municipal levy. Next slide. And our revenue sources and funding sources can be shown here. That municipal levy is about 40%. That will shrink a bit as we see some of our special project activities increase. And the reason it's a little higher than normal, it's usually been about stood at 1/3, is because our self-generated revenue overall is down. Our parks were 9 million in the previous years, and now are going down to 7 million. So that sort of affects the overall distribution of levy, making self-generated coming down a bit from the typically close to 50%. Next slide. So the bottom line in terms of general municipal levy is overall looking at a 0.5% increase at this point, or just over $12 million. We are increased, it's broken down between really an increase in operating levy, and our capital maintenance levy allotment is remaining the same as the prior year. Again, special projects are offset and do not rely municipal funding. Next slide. And finally, how does this affect the region specifically? The levy, while it's going up overall for the corporation 2.5% with apportionment based on assessment values, the region is actually coming in at 1.9%, or roughly about $120,000 overall increase to your general municipal levy act. Next slide. And we always sort of give a bit of point of reference based on just over 1 million population in our watershed, that the municipal per capita levy is just over $11.09. Next slide. That concludes our presentation, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Always a good presentation. Always nice to hear from the good folks at GRCA, and the work that you do is much appreciated. Do we have any questions from council? Just do so by, if you do have a question, just use the raise hand function on the Zoom screen. Okay, I don't see, sorry, Tim? Yeah. Okay, so we don't have any other questions, but Councillor Jowett, as you know, is chair of the GRCA, regional council member. And Councillor Jowett, I'd like you to have the final word with respect to the GRCA. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Chair Strickland, and Sam and Sonia, for your impeccable presentation as usual. We are very proud of the work that you do. To say the least, well, I'm going to tell you my least favorite words right now, and it's unprecedented. However, that is exactly what has happened since you took on this position, Sam. And Sonia, your support, and of course Karen's support, and the senior leadership team have done an amazing job of supporting the changes and the things thrust upon us on a regular basis, inclusive of natural hazards, watershed management changes, COVID, budget changes, and so I'm very, very appreciative of your work, and I know I speak on behalf of our very proud board that you have done some fine work. My tenure is coming to a close, so I did want to take the opportunity to thank you publicly for making the last 5 years very, very rewarding for me. So thank you for that. Jane told me when I took over that this is run just like a municipality. And at first I kind of thought, come on. but how right she was, because we are, from a budget perspective, from a procedural perspective, and now from this heightened political perspective, our own little community municipality that looks after our humongous water system, watershed. So thank you both today for coming in, and we look forward to getting our motion on the table today. And thank you again for being really easy to work with. Thank you to my board members who have always supported Sam and Sonia and the leadership team.
Well, thank you, Councillor Jowett. I didn't realize how time flies when you come to the end of your term. So on behalf of Regional Council, thanks very much for your great leadership at GRCA and your representation, not only for the citizens of the region of Waterloo, but for the entire watershed. So congratulations on a job well done. And we all are very much aware of the work that still remains at GRCA, as there's other battles to fight on the horizon. But thanks for the work that you've done.
Thanks, Sean. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now look at all those applauses you got from. Okay, back to you, Mr. Dyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Up next, we have a presentation on the 2021 water and wastewater budgets from the region's Director of Water Services, Nancy Kodousek.
Welcome, Nancy.
Welcome, and I'll just share my screen. and hopefully you can see it. Thank you. Through to you, Chair Strickland. This is the 2021 User Rate Water Services presentation. The water supply services include source protection, conservation, engineering, operations, and laboratory services. The region supplies approximately 55 million cubic meters of safe drinking water annually. The 2021 water supply budget is $59 million. Staff identified savings through optimization of utilities and maintenance and reductions in travel expenses, mileage, and other costs. The capital program was also adjusted to reflect increases in engineering estimates, new infrastructure investments, and also in creating a sustainable rate profile. A 0% user rate is recommended with no increase. And for COVID impacts, we are seeing an increase in our water demands. The water capital program for 10 years is $541 million. Below are some of the key projects that we'll be working on. The manganese upgrade includes 4 different water sites: New Dundee, the Shingleton well system, Herb well system, and the Middleton water supply system. All these plants over the next 10 years will be upgraded with iron and manganese treatment. The SCADA, Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition, is an upgrade that will impact every water treatment facility in the region. It is a multi-phase, multi-year project that has a team effort of operations, maintenance, design and construction, and a contractor to perform. Some of the key initiatives that we're working on in the winter coming up, we will be partnering with the facilities to work on a pilot to reduce salt application in our parking lots and walkways, keeping them safe, but also protecting water. Our education systems have gone virtual, and we have our first e-newsletter, the Enviro News, and we're also have a new social media campaign for reducing winter salt application. Under climate change and building resilience, we have, through our critical infrastructure, both our linear or water mains and our vertical treatment, looking at what equipment is critical and where we need to reinvest. We're also looking at optimizing our treatment. A few innovations: we're combining our Strange Street and William Street water supply systems and putting treatment at the Strange Street site. In October, these new iron manganese filters were delivered to the Strange Street site, and the plant is to be commissioned in early 2023. Mannheim Water Treatment Plant, our main surface water plant, will be optimized, and we'll look at various processes and treatments in the plant, looking at how to improve them and improve the equipment and controls. I talked about a little bit the SCADA upgrade. This SCADA, our Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition system that we have, will upgrade the monitoring and control for all our water systems, improving the reliability, security, and compliance. Oops. For water communications, we've gone virtual, but our focus continues to be on protecting our groundwater, on conservation, and we've launched a new program this year to soften hot water only, and we've had quite an interesting uptake with that. On the wastewater treatment, our services include conservation, engineering, operations, biosolids management, environmental and laboratory services. The wastewater treatment operating budget is 78 million, and staff were able to identify savings of 1.4 million through optimizing utilities and maintenance and operations, as well as reductions in conferences, mileage, and other costs. Adjustments were made to the capital program, a minor reduction in the 10-year capital program from 2020, as well as adjusting timelines of projects, ensuring, again, a sustainable rate profile. A 0% user rate is recommended, so no increase. The capital program is 480 million. The 3 projects of Kitchener, Galt, and the rural infrastructure are all focused on infrastructure reinvestment and growth projects that we're looking at. We first look at a wastewater optimization, and also looking at servicing plans at our Baden, New Hamburg facility, as well as our Wellesley facilities. Again, on community initiatives, we partner with the university on various studies, including reduction in nutrients and looking at how microplastics impact our treatment process. For education, we had a focus in the beginning of the pandemic on flushables and promoting through infographics and education. And again, looking at optimization in the GRCA presentation, they talked about their optimization work, and our Preston wastewater treatment plant was the only treatment plant in the Grand River watershed to receive a gold award for their optimization work. This work looks at improving capacity, performance, and reducing waste streams. Some of the innovation programs that we have are, we're one of the first wastewater treatment plants in Ontario to go to a new chemical to disinfect our wastewater that does not harm fish. We're also looking at optimization studies with our chemical at the Galt wastewater treatment plant. We just finished one study, and we're starting it at Kitchener plant to ensure we have best chemical treatment, improving the quality and the effluent that we produce. At our St. Jacobs wastewater treatment plant, we were doing optimization studies to look at capacity without new infrastructure. We also looked at a reinvestment in infrastructure through upgrading our equipment. And at our Hespeler wastewater treatment plant, we'll be one of the first plants in North America to install the new membrane aerated bioreactor. And that was a program that received green municipal funding. We also have at our 3 largest wastewater treatment plants, Kitchener, Waterloo, and Galt and Cambridge, the installation of the cogeneration units, which are combined heat and power generators. And those generators should be operational in early 2001. They will offset our requirements for hydro, as well as reducing greenhouse gases. On our retail side, for the water distribution system, we have a 2.8 million budget. The wastewater collection is 1.5 million, and staff were able to identify 60,000 in savings through optimization of maintenance and operations. Again, a recommendation of a 0% user rate, so no increase. Again, the service was uninterrupted, and we are seeing some increase in residential water demands. Some of the initiatives that we're working on is we will be working on a Wellesley master servicing plan. We are looking at infrastructure work for the Roseville water treatment plant. We are working on education, and we very recently had door hangers in the community of Ayr talking about conservation, and also our water softening program to soften only hot water. In building resilience, our engineering team has been looking at a leak reduction program, and we've built in a district metering system in Ayr to help us, assist us in identifying locations of leaks and reducing them. We've also had sanitary sewer work going on in both Wellesley and North Dumfries to identify the condition of the sewers and do any repairs where leaks or cracks occur. The water distribution budget, the operating budget, is $2.8 million. Our 10-year capital program is also $2.8 million, and the capital program is broken down into leak detection, distribution studies, meter replacement, which we project in 2024-25, and fleet replacement. For our wastewater collection, our operating budget is $1.5 million. The 10-year capital program is $2 million, and our focus in the capital program is on infrastructure replacement and collection studies. That concludes my presentation, and I'd be pleased to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Nancy, for a very thorough presentation, a good overview of water and wastewater. Much appreciated. We do have some questions. Councillor Foxton.
Thank you, and through the chair, I had sent all of you an email just a while ago in regards to the high cost of water within the township and within Ayr specifically. I met with the staff this morning, and there's a few things we can do to deal with this situation. So I want to thank them for their efforts and hope to see them come to fruition so that we can rectify this problem because it became quite extensive and people became quite vocal. So hopefully moving forward, we can clarify and clean this up. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Councillor Foxton. Councillor Jowett.
Thank you, Chair Strickland. And so, Nancy, I don't know if you heard a rumor, but we have a motion coming before us this evening. And I'm hoping you can just indulge me with this big picture question I have. What is the most notable investment as a region that we have made that supports our watershed neighbors? And what is the condition of our watershed because of it?
Nancy?
Yes, if you go back several years, and I don't know if Thomas would want to add to that, but the region at one point had a wastewater capital program of over $700 million. And the region, and that $700 million investment was on upgrading the treatment plant and improving the quality of the effluent. And the major investment of that was at the Kitchener wastewater treatment plant. It included putting in some very high level treatment at the Kitchener wastewater treatment plant. And we actually, through our partnership with the university, one of the professors has been going in and studying the fish and the health of the fish in the river. And before the treatment plant upgrades and after the treatment plant upgrades. And what we've heard from the professor and what we've heard from the GRCA as well is that significant investment that the region made over the last 10 years, because we put most of those upgrades in and completed them, I believe, this year at the Kitchener wastewater treatment plant, had a significant impact into the quality of the Grand River. One of the areas where they monitor very closely is the dissolved oxygen level. And in past years, prior to our upgrades, they used to see a real decline in oxygen levels, which would impact the quality of the river. And since our upgrades, they're not seeing those type of depletions of oxygen. So through the work of the GRCA and their optimization study, through the university study, the fish study, we have seen that we have improved that quality of the Grand River.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that, Nancy. And thank you for all your hard work.
Thanks, Councillor John. And we're not done yet. Did I see a slide there that shows the projected 10-year capital forecast for water and wastewater at over $400 million, Nancy?
Yeah, our water capital program is 541, and our wastewater 10-year capital program is I just have to go back to that slide, is 480.
So it's a billion between the two over the next 10 years.
Correct.
Very significant. Okay, thank you. Councillor Galloway.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Nancy, for both the utilities, water and wastewater, what did the rate model last year when we were doing the budget last year, what did it forecast the 2021 rates increases to be? Do you have that in front of you, or?
Yeah, I believe Craig Dyer in his slides will be presenting on that, but the water supply was projected to be 1.9 in 2021, and the wastewater was projected to be 4.9 increase in 2021.
Mr. Dyer's nodding.
Okay. So, go ahead. Yeah.
Nodding to say that, yes, I'll be covering that off in my slide deck.
Okay, well, my question is how, or maybe I wait till the slide deck is done. I'm curious as to how we went from 1.9 to 0 and 4.9 to 0 on our rate model. I'm not disagreeing with it. I just want to understand it and reflect back, as a number of members of this council might remember, and I'm not sure how many years ago, we did have a few years of successive 0% utility rate increases, and then had to do some catch up with 13% and 11% rate increases at the time. And it was partly because we went with 0% increases. And I know what we're trying to do in terms of the current economy and all that. But I'm just trying to understand what the risk is that if we do these zeros, when we thought it was going to be 4.9 and 1.9, that then in subsequent years, we aren't going to be dealing with a 10% or 8% or some other high number because we did some zeros back in 2021.
Councillor Galloway, could I just ask you to hold that question, and then Mr. Dyer will go through his presentation. And then I'll put you at the top of the queue to reiterate that question, and Mr. Dyer will address it.
That's fine.
Okay, great. Thank you, because Mr. Dyer is up next. I have no further questions. Thank you very much, Nancy. Keep up the good work. Okay, Mr. Dyer.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. And yes, I hope to be able to answer Councillor Galloway's question as I go through these next few slides. I have actually two separate slide decks. The first one is Appendix C to report 20-34 on the agenda, and this deals with what we refer to as the wholesale water supply and wastewater treatment budgets. This is the supply of water and the treatment of wastewater, as opposed to the retail function in Wellesley and North Dumfries, which we'll deal with separately. Without hopefully duplicating too much of of Nancy's slide deck and focusing on some of the key items with respect to the proposed water and wastewater budgets. I think from a staff perspective, we would say that the council direction has been met. The volumetric and fixed monthly rates are proposed to be unchanged for 2021. And that, to a great extent, has been accomplished through, I would say, two approaches. One is a detailed review that staff undertook of operating costs and some savings that were identified and reflected in the budget, as well as some adjustments to the timing of capital projects. We've spoken, I think, a number of times about the significance of the capital program. As Chair Strickland referred to, it's $1 billion over the next 10 years. It's a significant driver of rate increases in any given year. And I would say that the adjustments to the timing of certain projects have helped us to put together a rate model that shows certainly continues to show increases over the next 9 years, but not at a level as contemplated as recently as the last model. 2021 capital spending from a user rate perspective, about $22 million lower than originally projected. There has been some capital funding and capital projects added to the capital program, mostly in the outer years. But overall, we do have an improved debt projection relative to what was presented last year. And as I said earlier, the review of base operating expenditures has resulted in reductions of about $2 million in addition to one full-time equivalent position. So the direction from council to build 0% user rate impacts with options to inflation. The base budget, of course, reflects our current service levels and any adjustments to maintain those service levels in 2021. And as I've already mentioned, the staff review identified additional efficiencies without impacting service levels. So I think this slide supports Ms. Kodousek's answer to Councillor Galloway's first question, which was a year ago we were projecting a 1.9% wholesale water supply rate increase in 2021 and a 4.9% wastewater treatment increase in 2021. And both of those, along with the water distribution and water collection rates, all recommended to be zero in 2021. So this slide shows the impact of the wholesale water and wastewater costs, again, without a change in the rate, no planned increase in 2021. So where did some of these savings come from? So you may recall we provided a report on the recent provincial budget that was announced back on November the 5th. And there were two measures within that budget that provided some immediate savings within the water and wastewater budgets, both related to property taxes and electricity. And property taxes may seem a little bit odd, but we do pay a property tax, what's referred to as a payment in lieu of taxes on properties with respect to water, wastewater, waste management, and transit. And you'll recall the reduction to the business education tax, which was announced in that budget. And in as much as it provides benefit to commercial industrial properties across the region, it also has a positive effect on the taxes that are paid on our water and wastewater properties. And then in addition to that, and even more significantly, proposed changes to electricity pricing are going to save us an estimated $900,000 in operating costs in 2021. So in total, just from these two measures, $1.2 million in ongoing operating savings. As Nancy indicated, 2021 water supply budget, $58 million. This just shows you a graphic of how that is spent. Two items to note. One, on the right-hand side, Grand River Conservation Authority, so the GRCA levy is funded through both the water supply and the wastewater treatment operating budgets. And then we would also note the significance of the capital financing. So this is direct contribution from the water budget into our capital reserves, and then we use that to fund a significant portion of the $1 billion capital program for water and wastewater. It's about $541 million on the water side. Overall, the changes operationally, I would say, have been relatively modest from 20 to 2021, just a minor increase in overall spending and a reduction in capital spending of about $8 million. We usually provide council with an update on flows on the water and wastewater side. So this chart shows you budgeted in green and actual in blue flows over the last few years. For a few years in a row, 15 to 17, we were actuals were below budget, much closer in 18 and 19. And as we indicated in our recent periodic financial report, 2020, we're seeing an increased use of water relative to budget. That's going to produce a small surplus we expect at the end of 2020. And we have raised the overall amount of water flows for budget purposes in 2021 accordingly, but certainly not to the level that we've experienced in 2020. This chart we put together to give you some context to what recent rate increases have been and what the model is suggesting now over the next 10 years. So increases as high as 4.9% in 2015 and ranging between 1.9 and 2.9% over the last 4 years. Recommended no change in 2021, and then basically back to, for at least the next 5 years, a similar range as we've experienced over the last 4 or 5 years in that 1.9 to 2.9 range. It's a little bit higher now at the end of the 10-year program. You're going to see the opposite when we get to wastewater. And again, this is largely due to changes in the timing of the capital program. Which we'll turn to here for water supply, $541 million over 10 years for a variety of different types of projects. The right-hand side shows how we fund that $500 million, and quite significantly, the user rate capital reserve funding almost 60% of the capital program. And I'll get in a minute to what this means from a debt perspective. But a relatively, I would say, manageable amount of debt, mostly on the growth-related side. Very little user rate debt planned over the next 10 years. And from in terms of good news in this budget, I think one of the pieces of good news here is that we are on the verge now of being debt-free on the water rate side. So remember, we issue debt for two different reasons, for non-growth purposes funded by the user rates, and for growth-related purposes funded by development charges. We last issued debt for on the water rate side in 2011. It will be fully paid off in 2021. And of course, as that debt has been dropping over the last few years, that provides, some additional budget capacity in order to fund future capital works from the rate as opposed to borrowing. We do have borrowing planned as early as 21 on the growth-related side. Whether we actually issue that debt, I think, will be a function of how the capital projects proceed in 2021, and we'll take a very close look at our development charge reserve fund balances and see the extent to which we can fund the work from those reserves. So it's a very good news from a water supply debt perspective. And you can see how this plays out here in the debt servicing costs. We come down into 2022 and we'll have no rate-supported debt servicing costs in our budget in 2022. We do see that come back up a little bit, but certainly if you look on the scale on the right-hand side, so left-hand side is the actual debt servicing costs. Right-hand side is those costs as a percentage of rate revenue. Very small, very manageable, at least for the foreseeable future. A little bit more challenging on the growth-related side as we issue debt to accommodate the significant amount of growth that we're expecting in the region. Again, something that we'll monitor, that we'll watch very closely. Based on the budget as contemplated right now, we would 5 years from now end up with debt servicing costs at about 18% of development charge collection revenue, which we think is manageable and reasonable as we move forward. So similar set of slides on the wastewater side. Again, a review of the overall operating budget, $79 million. Significant portions of this budget relating to capital financing, to debt servicing costs, and for the contract that we have with the Ontario Clean Water Agency, who operates our 13 plants on our behalf. You can also see the GRCA contribution there down near the bottom as well. A few changes with respect to year-over-year operating budgets, some adjustments with respect to capital financing. We made a sizable contribution to the the rate stabilization reserve in 2020. So that puts us in a much better position with respect to our ability to deal with any in-year variances on both the revenue and expenditure perspective. Overall, an adjustment, expenditure adjustment of about $1.1 million, but we've also reduced the flow estimates, as you'll see in a moment, and that's what's allowed us to stay at zero. Capital program down by about $15 million in 21 compared to last year. The flows have been challenging over the last number of years. We have been consistently below our budgeted flows, and as you'll recall, we've had a number of unfavorable variances as a result. I would say that that gap is narrowing slowly, but we've certainly, you can see how the green line has come down. So this is budgeted flows coming down every year since 2015. And we're getting, I think, very close to now being able to be in a position where we're matching what the actuals are. There's maybe a little bit of risk here, but again, we have some capacity in the tax stabilize, it's twice I said that, in the rate stabilization reserve to deal with that. Again, from a rate perspective, we've had several years of significant, fairly significant wastewater rate increases going back to 2015. That came down significantly in 2020, and again, recommending zero in 2021, and then back up to 2.9, 3.9 range over the next 10 years. Again, this is a significant improvement over what we've seen in past years. Capital program, almost $500 million. Again, significant funding from the user rate reserve, suggesting that we're in a very strong position from a capital financing perspective. Still some concerns over the amount of growth-related debt that we're proposing to issue over the next 10 years. It's about 77 million. And that's mainly because we've already issued a fair amount of growth-related debt over the last number of years, to a great extent to fund the improvements and expansion at the Kitchener plant that Ms. Kodousek referenced in her presentation. All that being said, our projections say that the amount of wastewater debt will actually be on the decline over the next few years. And that is a different picture than we would have presented in the past, and largely related to timing of the overall capital program. And so this chart shows you the difference. The red line was the debt outstanding projected last year, and the blue line, the debt outstanding, sorry, not debt outstanding, this is debt additions, rather. So additional debt that we were planning on issuing is significantly lower in this capital program than it was a year ago. And it shows you two things. One, the size of the capital program in wastewater is significant, and even small changes to the timing of projects can have a significant impact on how much debt we need to issue. So growth-related debt servicing costs, again, projected to be relatively flat over the next few years, which is very encouraging. And we have additional debt that's expected to be issued over the next few years. But again, I would say it's all relatively manageable. The debt servicing costs as a percentage of DC collections is high. That's the blue line you can see in the 50% range. The forecast is an improvement over what we've had in the past. It's a risk that we monitor regularly. Basically, what this is saying is that about 50% of our planned DC collections will be set aside to fund debt servicing costs. So that does limit us a little bit in terms of our ability to fund new projects, but again, certainly an improvement over what we saw last year. The non-growth side, again, staying relatively constant over the next several years. So, it's certainly manageable within the rate right now, and I would say no real concerns on the user rate side as we look ahead. And so from a conclusion perspective, again, we believe that the council direction has been met, rates are unchanged. The models have been adjusted to reflect the timing of capital programs. And we believe from a staff perspective that we've been able to do that in a way that maintains the long-term financial sustainability and viability of both of these budgets. This year's budget with no rate increase, certainly very helpful for the area municipalities, where the cost of water supply and wastewater treatment is a significant component of their operating budgets. Keeping those rates at the 2020 levels will be extremely helpful for them. As I indicated, debt-free for water on the non-growth side at the end of 2021, and in a very good position from an asset renewal funding perspective. So, Mr. Chair, those are my comments, and we'd be certainly happy to answer any questions that councillors may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dyer. Councillor Galloway.
Well, I think I've got part of the answer, but I would like, Mr. Chair, just to go a little bit further. So, Greg, so what is the primary difference between the rate model that we were presented last year and now the rate model that we're being presented this year? Not just the difference in the numbers, but in the information that leads to, a situation where we can put in a 0% for 1 year and still only have a 1.9 or a relatively small number next year. There's not going to be any catch up. How is that happening within the budget in the two utilities?
Yeah, Mr. Dyer.
Yep. So through you, Mr. Chair, I would say there are two main differences between this year and last year. One is the extent of operating budget efficiencies and reductions that have been identified by water services staff and implemented in this year's budget. And the second would be a reprofiling of certain capital projects that have allowed us to fund more of the work from the reserves, issue less debt. I think those are the two most significant components that have changed between last year and this year.
So is that likely to manifest itself in future years if the rate stabilization fund is being depleted, that we will have to do more debt? I mean, debt is cheap at this point in time. Interest rates are cheap at this point in time.
Yes, certainly the cost of borrowing remains extremely attractive for municipalities, certainly a AAA-rated municipality. I would say that the modeling that we've done at this point does not suggest a significant risk of major rate increases required in the foreseeable future. Now, we can't obviously predict everything that might happen, but I think as we look at as we look at the capital programs, as we look at the balances in our rate stabilization funds, the balances in our capital reserves, and the overall funding of the capital program, which, as we've discussed, is a significant component of the rate. We believe at this point we've found a good balance in managing those risks. Obviously, something we'll need to be mindful of, but at this point, we believe that that the forecasts that we're providing through the updated models are reasonable and appropriate.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Dyer. Mr. Chairman, I'm satisfied. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Galloway. Good questions, and thanks to Craig and Nancy for that overview on user rates 101. It's always very instructive and much appreciated. No further questions. So looking at the agenda, there's a couple information reports there on water supply and wastewater treatment budgets, and also one for water. So I'm assuming there's no questions on those information reports in our agenda package. Mr. Dyer pretty well covered it in his PowerPoint. So what I'm going to suggest is, before we go to the tax-supported operating budget and capital review, there's about 40 slides there. We'll take a 10-minute recess, and we'll reconvene at 25 to 4. Okay, so we'll recess, take a break for 10 minutes. We'll see you back in 10 minutes. Thanks, everyone. Okay, I'd like to call Budget Committee back to order, please. So we left off prior to a recess. It was Mr. Dyer, and we're going to start the slide deck and overview of the preliminary tax-supported operating budget and capital program. Mr. Dyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've just started to share another slide deck. Looks like it's visible. I'll just get the slideshow started. Just give me 1 second here. Okay, so thank you again, Mr. Chair. And what we have next for Budget Committee today is an overview of our 2021 plan and tax-supported budget. So what we're going to provide for you today is an outline, an overview, some insight into some of the key initiatives that will be proposed through the 2021 operating budget. The budget is still being worked on, but we're very close, and we'll show you where we are at this point. Again, give you an overview of some of the more significant items in the budget, and we're going to talk throughout about some of the significant budget assumptions because it certainly has been a challenging budget to put together. With a number of, I would say, material assumptions that we've made to a great extent relating to COVID and the expenditure and revenue impacts as a result of the pandemic. It's a bit unusual for me to start off a slide deck with the next steps, but it seemed appropriate to let Council know, again, where we're at and what's going to happen next. So we are, as the slide indicates, in the very late stages of developing the 2021 budget. We're a few days away of nailing the numbers down. We'll be putting details together in a more detailed package, similar to the water and wastewater package that you saw with your agenda last week. Those will be released in the early part of December, and that will lead us towards the detailed budget committee review of the tax-supported budget on December 16th, and that will be a major focus of that day. And then based on the schedule approved by Council back in the early part of the fall, budget approval planned for January 20th of next year. So I just thought it would be helpful to know, kind of where we're at as you see the information that's being presented today. A couple of context slides. I'm actually not going to spend too much time on these. I think Chair Redman and Committee Chair Strickland and Mr. Lauckner have covered all of this in their earlier remarks. So I think I'll leave these for now, but maybe just looking at the top bullet on this page, I would say, as we put our plan together and started to contemplate what's beyond COVID-19, we have tried to be as focused and intentional and deliberate as possible when we put this 2021 budget together. And I hope Council committee members will see that as we run through the presentation, as you see the material that will be released in early December, and as we go through the budget process over the next little while. So today's presentation is going to be centered around a few call them, ideas or components of the 2021 plan and the budget. So thinking back to the discussion that happened at Council's workshop back in September and the direction that was given to staff coming out of that, which, as Mr. Lauckner said earlier, is extremely helpful for staff as we try to put together a budget under very difficult circumstances. We start off with continuing to deliver the essential services that we have been and have continued to deliver throughout the pandemic over the course of 2020. You're going to see some clear and direct references to programs that we're either continuing or putting in place and how they relate back to Council's strategic plan and the 5 focus areas that are in that plan, and that continue to be what we continue to focus on. Obviously, we're going to have some discussion about the ongoing impacts and projected impacts of the COVID pandemic. But in the midst of that, we also want to focus a bit on some of the new strategic investments, again, stemming from the workshop in September and the direction provided to staff on providing new investments to support the most vulnerable in this community. We believe what we've put together has a relatively long list of thoughtful, intentional, and deliberate budget savings. We'll go through some of those. We also believe that what we've put together and what we're going to recommend to Council reflects a prudent use of provincial funding. That should probably say provincial and federal funding. My apologies for that. As well as prudent use of our reserves as we head into 2021. It will outline the outcomes, certain outcomes relating to the KPMG service review, and you'll see as we go through the capital program in December, we'll continue investing in regional infrastructure, and this relates both to our existing assets and the need to keep those assets in good functioning shape in order to help with the service delivery, as well as new infrastructure that has to be put in place in order to accommodate and service growth that's happening. And through all of that, achieving all of the above with a 0% tax increase with options to inflation. So this is the essence of what the next half an hour or so is going to be. I'm going to go through each of these items and provide you with some context to each as we get close to finalizing the budget. So delivering essential services. I think no surprises here. Enhanced public health and ambulance services. We have significant increase in public health staff planned for, that are actually coming on stream now and being planned for 2021 with funding from the province. We're proposing an enhancement to our ambulance service in order to continue to implement the paramedic services strategic plan. Continuing and enhancing and expanding on the housing side at Sunnyside Home, childcare system management, and our income support operations, continuing to provide safe drinking water, an efficient and effective public transit system, as well as waste management and services on regional roads. And then not to forget at all our important cultural sites, libraries, and the international airport. All of these services to continue as we head into 2021. And as we think about our focus areas, the 5 focus areas that this council has identified, I think I would say recently reaffirmed back at the September workshop that these are the 5 areas we should be focused on. We would describe this budget as purpose-built. And what I mean by that is that it directly relates to, in various ways, the 5 focus areas that Council has adopted. And I'm just going to touch on each of those just briefly. This is by no means meant to be an exhaustive list, but just enough to give you a sense of where the region's efforts and activities are relative to these focus areas. So on the thriving economy side, we're going to propose some new temporary investments to support the impacted business sectors. We're proposing $3 million over the next 18 to 24 months to help the areas of our economy that are struggling the most through the pandemic. We'll be continuing with the highly successful Brownfield Financial Incentive Program. The region has had since, for some time and expanded last year, development charge discounts for industrial development in the region, as well as for qualifying office development. In accordance with our previous reports and presentations today, we're proposing to hold the water and wastewater rates at 2020 levels and to minimize property tax increases next year. And just to pick another example, the continued development of the East Side lands. With respect to healthy, safe, and inclusive communities, lots of attention and focus recently on the housing side. So through the 2021 budget and updated capital program, continuing the implementation of the Waterloo Region Housing Master Plan, which will add over 600 units over the next few years. The Rapid Housing Initiative, $8 million provided by senior levels of government that will provide a more immediate investment as it must be spent by the end of next year. 2 pilot projects which are currently underway. And in addition to that, we're proposing $20 million over 2 years to put a program in place to acquire property that we would then make available for the development and community investment in affordable housing. Working with the Anti-Racism Advisory Group to implement initiatives to improve the economic and cultural health and wellness of our BIPOC communities, thereby advancing equity within those communities. I've already referred to the additional ambulances and paramedics that will form part of this budget. And of course, responding to COVID, which we're seeing most notably within public health, within our shelter system, and in long-term care at Sunnyside Home. Sustainable transportation will continue to see a long list of active transportation projects in our capital program. The King Victoria Transit Hub, new information, drawings released recently out for review and comment by the public. That project continues to move forward, and we look forward to hopefully some constructive discussions with the province with respect to the funding of that very important facility. And then with respect to our ongoing work on our regional road network, which, as I think I referred to earlier, revolves around both the renewal and upkeep of our existing roads and the construction of new and expanded road capacity as the region continues to grow. Environment and climate change. Council approved an electric bus acquisition strategy that is planned to start in 2022. That strategy has been reflected into the updated 10-year transit capital program. We have a number of energy retrofits in regional facilities, which will also result in some budget savings, continuing to protect our water resources, as we've discussed over the course of the afternoon today. And then maybe on a smaller scale, but across the organization, increasing our use of virtual meetings, training, conferences, which will result in less travel, fewer greenhouse gas emissions, and of course, budget savings as well. And then our responsive and engaging public service. Through this budget, we'll be proposing for Council's consideration a $3 million investment over 2 years in technology solutions, in additional technology solutions over and above what we had already planned. And this is to help us to modernize our back office processes and give us a quick return on investment so that we can find additional savings in order to redirect as much funding as possible towards the services that we deliver for the 600,000 residents of Waterloo Region. Implementing the KPMG service review outcomes. The review was undertaken using funding from the Audit and Accountability Fund that was set up by the province. The region took that opportunity to look at areas where we were less cost effective, and a number of recommendations have been brought forward for consideration by Council and Budget Committee with respect to the service review. Significant piece of important work being done over the next 12 months, the regional official plan update led by our colleagues in planning. Significant amount of work to be done between now and this time next year in order to meet the provincial deadlines on the update. And as you'll see in a later slide, a significant effort to find efficiencies and cost containment across this organization, again, to free up financial capacity to direct it to the most vulnerable communities and people in our organization. And while not a focus area per se, it seemed important to add a slide about our people, our staff team here at Waterloo Region, and the success of this plan will be up to us to determine as we implement whatever is approved by council in 2021 and in 2022. We have a highly qualified professional staff that daily reflect the values of the region: service, integrity, respect, innovation, and collaboration. And we're going to build on these values, and we're creating a culture here at the region which puts citizens first. And we do that by always looking to find ways of improving the services we deliver and our regional programs, demonstrating our respect and inclusivity for diverse communities, always approaching problems with a learning mindset, and how do we overcome those challenges and problems to improve the services we deliver. As Ms. Albright indicated earlier today, being nimble and responsive to change and progress. We've found new ways of making decisions this year throughout the pandemic that were that previously I'm not sure we realized we could do. And one obvious example, back in February, I think it would have been fair to say that we didn't have a significant work from home policy. And by the end of March, we had 1,000 people working productively from home. So our ability to be nimble, to respond to changes in our environment, and of course to ensure a safe workplace, both in terms of physical safety and in terms of the mental health of our people. Switching to COVID for a second, transit ridership estimates. So as we talked about in numerous reports and meetings over the course of this year, transit is where we have experienced the most significant impacts, certainly from a financial perspective, with respect to COVID. So we're currently operating October of 20 versus October of 19 at about 42% of the ridership levels. We're estimating for 2021 that transit ridership will be at about 55% of pre-COVID levels. This generally aligns with what a number of our peers, transit service delivery agencies across the province are using. It's, we fall kind of right into the what I'd call a normal range, if I can use that term, of estimates for next year. That has a significant revenue impact for us. Enhanced public health response with respect to funded by the province. So significant commitment by the province. We have almost 90 new positions we're proposing to add to the public health budget in 2021. The safety and security of residents and staff at Sunnyside Home has been paramount since March, and we have been working with additional resources at Sunnyside since then. We have incorporated those resources into the 2021 budget with some expectation of additional funding by the province. Enhanced cleaning measures for transit and ambulance, and of course, ongoing funding for our homeless shelters. We were the recipient of, I think, almost $10 million of the social services relief funding that has helped us to maintain and adapt our homeless shelter system in 2020. We're now budgeting for that as we head into 2021. And so overall, our estimate, and this is a budget to budget estimate, 2021 to 2020, about $41 million in COVID-related costs and revenue losses. About half of that relates to transit ridership alone. I want to talk about this point for a bit. It reinforces some of the comments that Chair Strickland made at the outset of the day, which is the cost containment measures that the region put in place back in the spring of 2020 has been significant in a number of ways. From a purely financial perspective, what it has allowed us to do is offset a significant component of our revenue losses in 2020. What that means is we've had to use a smaller amount of our Safe Restart funding in 2020 in order to deal with the deficit. Correspondingly, that allows us to carry more funding forward into 2021. And that has been a significant, I'm going to say, advantage, benefit to the region as we put our 2021 budget together, because those actions that we took back in the spring have meant more funding is available as we transition our budgets, through another year of the COVID pandemic. Overall, Safe Restart funding carryover and program-specific grants we're budgeting at approximately $33 million in 2021. And as we think about the provincial and federal situation, we know that the most recent estimates of the federal deficit is almost $350 billion. And the provincial budget on November the 5th projected a deficit of $38 billion at the province. That creates challenges for the senior levels of government to continue to provide funding for municipalities. And we do believe that any additional funding in 2021 could come with conditions and restrictions. So just like phase 2 of the Safe Restart funding this year had conditions, we believe that that would likely be the case as well. So it's just another example of where we need to find a balance. We need to make sure we're budgeting as appropriately as possible without introducing too much budget risk from a provincial funding perspective. Strategic investments I've spoken to. This chart shows you what they're proposed to look like from an investment and from a funding perspective. So over 2 years, over the next 2 years of this term of council, we're proposing a $41 million investment over those 4 areas with a combination of funding from existing reserves and from the property tax levy. Much more to come about these investments at the December 16th meeting. As we moved towards achieving a budget that met council's direction of 0%, plus options for inflation, we've had to look at a number of different ways of dealing with the budget gap. And by the budget gap, I mean the approximate $25 million difference we had between revenues and expenditures in order to get to zero. So these next 2 slides provide you with an overview of the major components of how we found that funding. So 2 comments on transit. So first of all, you may recall in the 2020 budget, there were, I believe, 3 budget issue papers, transit service expansions that were approved in the 2020 budget. Council made the decision, I'm going to say about mid-year, maybe just before mid-year, that we would not implement those measures in 2020 due to the pandemic. So that money was in the budget, the positions were in the budget. We have removed those service expansions from the budget in 2021. So these were positions that were never filled, hours that were never delivered, money got put into the budget, it's come out in 2021. And we've made an adjustment to transit service to approximately 91% of pre-COVID levels in order to reflect the current lower ridership that we're experiencing. We recognize that as ridership volumes change, we may need to be, we may need to be nimble, we may need to adapt to changing circumstances in 2021, but at this point, that's our best estimate of what our average service level would be over the course of next year. KPMG service review I've already referred to, a series of measures to improve our cost effectiveness. Voluntary exit opportunities have been presented for non-union staff and are being considered as we speak. We're looking to leave a number of vacant positions unfilled for a longer period of time. This does not necessarily create a permanent long-term savings, but at least helps us to deal with some of the budget impacts that we're experiencing in 2021, and gives us an opportunity to rethink what we should be do with vacant positions as they arise. Across the organization, we've made a concerted effort to reduce consulting costs, to reduce budgets for meetings, for conferences, for mileage, to travel, to reflect our virtual attendance. We have a series of energy and utility cost savings. A number of vacant positions are proposed to be removed from the budget altogether. And then finally, a contribution from the tax stabilization reserve of about $2.7 million, which is the final figure that we needed in order to get us to a 0% budget. From a federal and provincial funding perspective, I think this council has been very, what's the right word? Very good at thanking the federal and provincial governments for the funding they've provided. And it is and continues to be significant. So this chart shows you what has been announced and provided to the region over the course of 2020. It's over $62 million. Now, not all of this is operating. Not all of this is for 2020. So for example, Rapid Housing Initiative, capital spending that we have now in our budget for 2021. Safe Restart funding, some of it will apply to 2020, some will apply to 2021. But regardless of what it's for and how it's used, it's important, I think, for the region as an organization to acknowledge the significant contributions from our federal and provincial partners over the course of the last 8 or 9 months. And so that also creates then perhaps what has become one of the most significant challenges for staff as we head into the 2021 year, which is what are the assumptions that we make around federal and provincial subsidies? I'm just going to highlight some of them here relatively quickly. Safe Restart Fund, we're going to carry over unused money from 2020 into 2021. The municipal stream and the transit stream. The catch on the transit stream is that it all has to be used for eligible costs and lost revenues by March 31st. And this is one of the areas where we're hoping that the province will allow us a little bit more flexibility on how we use that funding. The municipal funding stream can be used at any time in 2021. Both of those are reflected in the budget. Emergency shelters, we've had about, so it's about $10 million we've received, about $1.5 million of what's been announced. We're going to carry forward into 2020, into 2021. There's an additional $2 million that we need over and above the funding that's available in order to operate our shelter system at its current capacity through the rest of 21. We have incorporated that $2 million into the budget. We don't have a commitment on it yet, but that is the assumption that we've made on the shelter side. Long-term care, we have been receiving funding from the province on a monthly basis. We have budgeted to continue to receive that funding in 2021 to offset our COVID-related costs. Similarly with paramedic services, it's about $800,000. And public health, I referred earlier to the almost 90 new positions. We've estimated about $8.5 million in incremental, temporary, 100% funding from the Ministry of Health. That is incorporated into the 2021 budget. Should talk a little bit about the tax stabilization reserve because we do have a contribution planned in order to help us achieve that 0% tax rate increase of $2.7 million. That's the bottom line on this chart. There are 4 or 5 other areas based on previous council direction and decisions that we have incorporated into the budget. So that includes everything from the funding of the separated cycling lane pilot, the final contribution for the SWIFT project. This is the Southwest Integrated Fiber Technology Project. It was a 4-year commitment. 2021 will be our last year. We're proposing to fund that from the Tax Stabilization Reserve. The region has successfully used the TSR, I would say, to bridge finance paramedic service expansions over the last several years. And this is because the provincial funding has about a 1-year lag after we incur the costs. And so we use the TSR in order to basically phase in the provincial funding as the expansions happen. So we have about 360,000 relating to the 2020 service expansion and about 660,000 relating to the proposed 2021 service expansion. I referred earlier to a business support strategic investment. Because of its temporary nature, we think it's appropriate to fund it from the reserve. And then, of course, the $2.7 million to achieve zero. So in total, that's about $6.7 million from the reserve. For your reference, that reserve has a target balance of $15 million. It had $15 million in that reserve at the end of 2019. And our projections right now suggest it will have $15 million in that reserve at the end of 2020 as well. So it's a sizable component of that, of the $15 million. That being said, we've never done a budget in the middle of a global pandemic before. And so we think it's an appropriate use of that funding. Just very briefly on the service review, 19 or 20 outcomes. A number of them have not identified any savings to date and will be revisited at some point. There's a few that are in process right now that will be finalizing over the next few days and presenting as part of the December 16th package. And a few where the decisions are pending based on a report that came through to committee a couple of weeks ago. On the capital side, a few high-level comments on the capital program. And Chair Strickland, I'm thinking back to the discussion that the ad hoc economic recovery committee had over the course of the summer.
Something like that.
Something like that, yes, absolutely. And I think it would be fair to characterize those discussions as there was a great interest among the committee for us to continue our investment in capital infrastructure across the region, both because we need to make sure that our assets remain in a state of good repair. We have a lot of growth in the community, and it also creates an economic benefit within the community as well. So we'll be presenting to council, to budget committee in a couple of weeks, a 2021 capital program that I believe is just under $500 million for next year, with significant investments in a number of different areas. I'm just going to touch on a couple. There's no way I could do it justice, but from a housing perspective, the Rapid Housing Initiative, the property acquisition investment I referred to earlier, continuing on with the first couple of projects on the Waterloo Region Housing Master Plan, and a significant amount of renewal at our 2,600 Waterloo Region housing units that we have. Public transit, one of the largest projects we have underway right now is the Northfield Drive Transit Facility, moving along with great success so far. That project started in March, scheduled to be completed in March of 2022. We'll be continuing on with our bus replacement program, and as I referred to earlier, the transit hub at the intersection of King and Victoria in Kitchener. On the road side, a long list of roads projects planned for 2021. River Road extension, some work on King Street from Highway 401 to Sports World Drive, larger projects on Highland Road and on Bleams Road as well. We'll provide much more detail. In fact, we'll provide the full list of all the projects contemplated over the next 10 years as part of the package for December 16th. Work continuing at the airport with respect to terminal expansion design, the EA related to a potential future runway expansion, and some pavement rehab in 2021. And then in our wide assortment of regional buildings, some significant renewal work at 150 Frederick, 99 Regina, 150 Main, not to mention Sunnyside Home and a long list of other facilities, as well as I mentioned earlier, some energy efficiency upgrades. And yes, Mr. Chair, I'm in the home stretch here. Just going to pause for a moment. And so trying to take all that and come up with a summary of some of the major initiatives, I would try to describe it this way. Fighting COVID at the top of the list. in public health, in long-term care, in paramedic services, in other areas. Certainly our shelter system as well. Investing in services for vulnerable citizens, and whether that's affordable housing, the shelter system, our BIPOC communities, the residents, 264 residents in our long-term care home. Paramedic service expansions, we're proposing to add more ambulances, more paramedics in about the middle part of 2021. The major investment in public health resources that I've already referred to, 85, it's probably closer to 90, but again, these are temporary positions, and this is using funding from the province, investing in regional infrastructure, which I've just referred to. And then on the transit side, the realignment of our service hours to reflect lower ridership levels, but still providing a high volume of service. And so in terms of where we're at right now and the current status of the tax-supported budget, it's difficult to try to take a budget of that size and summarize it in one page, but at a very high level, here are some of the numbers that we'll be considering. So this is, just for reference, this is property tax levy funding, and this is for regional services with the exception of police. So our base budget, for lack of a better term, at $414 million. I'm actually going to add in a couple of markers here. So the transit revenue loss and the other COVID-related impacts adds to about $41 million, the number I referred to earlier. When we back off provincial, and that should say, again, my apologies, provincial and federal COVID funding, 32.8 million, that's a net of about 8.2 million as an impact on our budget for next year. Significant levels of savings identified through transit service hours, through the KPMG service review, and a long list of efficiencies across the organization. And if I may take a moment, Mr. Chair, just to express my thanks to the entire management team, commissioners, directors, managers, supervisors, frontline workers who have all contributed significantly, I would say, over the last 5 months. It was June when we first identified a $20 to $25 million target in order to achieve 0%. And staff from across this organization have come together to help us to achieve that goal. And it was by no means an insignificant piece of work. It was a significant effort across all departments and areas of the region. So I thank them for that. Tax stabilization reserve I referred to, and if everything played out exactly the way this is contemplated right here, we'd have a levy in 2021 of $395.4 million. So that is $5.1 million higher than last year, which happens to then coincide with the capacity generated by 1.3% of assessment growth. And that's where our assessment growth has landed. We had originally hoped for 1.5. 1.3 would mark the lowest assessment growth in 10 years, very close to what we experienced in 2017. We do not have yet the details we need to give you a good explanation of what's included in that 1.3%. We'll have that. Maybe not by December 16th, certainly by the middle of January before the budget is approved. We need to dig deep into the assessment roll, the draft assessment roll, and understand basically understand what's happening. Because remember, assessment growth is a net figure, right? As new properties get built, expanded, improved, that adds to the assessment base. But as requests for reconsideration are considered and minutes of settlement are signed with MPAC, and as the Assessment Review Board completes its work, that all results in reductions in assessment. The net growth here is 1.3% for 2021. And I know Budget Committee is always interested in some of our more significant non-tax revenues. So we just listed 3 or 4 of them here. Public transit, you can see the significant impact. We budgeted $43.4 million in 2020. We're anticipating that we'll get about half of that this year. So we've adjusted the 2021 budget down to $23 million, which is a $20 million reduction. At this point, we are not proposing an increase to transit fares in 2021. That, of course, will be a decision for council to make, but there are no proposed fare increases built in 2021 right now. POA revenue, red light camera fines, both down in 2020 relative to budget and down in the 2021 budget, combined about $1.2 million. We are anticipating an increase in tipping fee revenue, and I would say, I don't have the full list with me, but I would say the majority of the user fees imposed by the region for various services, the majority of them will propose to remain unchanged in 2021. One of those exceptions is the tipping fee, where staff will recommend an increase of the tipping fee from $82 per metric ton to $85 on April the 1st, as well as the introduction of a new asbestos fee. You may recall that there was a tipping fee increase planned in 2020 back in April from 82 to 84. That increase was not implemented, again, due to the evolving COVID pandemic at the time. We'll have more information. In fact, a full list of any of the user fees that are changing, we'll have that full list in the material for December 16th. And then as I start to come to a conclusion here, I'm certainly keenly aware that the direction provided to staff back in September was 0% as well as excuse me, as well as options to inflation. Now, there's a wide range of estimates right now as to what inflation is going to be next year. Certainly, I don't think anybody a year ago was expecting that inflation would be as low as it is this year. The estimate that we're using right now is 1.5%. That is an average of 7 or 8 bank and government estimates of consumer price inflation in 2021. So if that was the rate of projected inflation, 1.5%, that would equate to about $5.9 million of additional spending on the regional side. So again, leaving police aside, just with respect to regional services. So what might those options look like? So we've provided 3 here for your consideration. And this is one of the areas where we would certainly like to start to get some input from council as to where you see the overall budget coming in and what you think of some of these options. So the first would be simply we would reduce our reliance on the tax stabilization reserve. We have a $6.7 million contribution in total built into the budget for a number of different purposes. We could reduce that contribution, leave more of that money in the reserve. That's less revenue into the budget, and so the levy has to come up. Another option would be to enhance or accelerate the levy funding of strategic investments in 2021. So you saw that chart earlier where we have some of the strategic investments funded from reserves, some from the levy. We could move more out of the reserves into the levy in 2021. And then, I think I've explained these in the wrong order. I think what I've just explained is the one on the right, which is replacing some of the reserve funding for strategic investments with levy dollars. The middle one would say we could enhance or accelerate levy funding for the strategic investments. So right now, we have a certain amount of funding in 2021, an incremental funding in 2022. If we fund more in 2021 from the levy, it's less of an increment as we head into 2022. So we have, and there's a whole range of options in between here, but we thought we'd at least give some context to if council believed a more appropriate approach would be to have a modest tax increase in 2021. Here's a few ways that could look. And so again, at some point today or in December, we'd like to get some feedback on those options from council. So key points for today. Council budget direction has been met. The levy increase as it stands of $5.1 million is equivalent to the estimated assessment growth, and that brings us to the 0%. Looking at some strategic purpose for an inflationary increase is definitely a discussion that Budget Committee should have over the next little while. And I think, we have to acknowledge the material and significant impact that the COVID pandemic has had on the region, on our services, and then again, to reiterate the significant level of provincial and federal funding support that we have received. New strategic investments, again, something that we'll look for some feedback from council on as we go through the budget review process. Implementation of the service review, again, a key component. And again, the detailed management review identified a significant amount of budget efficiencies, and that has been a big driver in our ability to achieve the council direction. Final slide, just with respect to process. So November 25th today. Coming up next is a special council meeting on the service review on December 2nd. Budget Committee is back on December 16th. And at that meeting, we'll have presentations from various departments on their plan and on their service plans for 2021. The police services are scheduled to make their annual presentation on the budget. It's also the day, we also have a public input meeting scheduled for that day. And I skipped over the row before that, the approval of the user rate budget. So we'll come back to you with a series of resolutions and recommendations with respect to the user rate budgets for 2021. And then, as I said earlier, approval of the tax-supported budget, both operating and capital, as well as user fees and charges, is planned for January 20th. Mr. Chair, on behalf of staff, I hope that has been a helpful overview of the budget, and we look forward to working with council as we move through the budget review process. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dyer. Certainly very helpful. And in about an hour and a half this afternoon, I think we've had an overview of over $1.5 billion worth of expenditures, with also a lot of changes that have been implemented by staff with direction from council. So that flexibility and adaptability is very much appreciated. Over to council now. Do we have any questions? To the clerk, I can't see the question screen. Councillor Jowett.
Thanks so much, Chair Strickland. Craig, thank you for your lightning rod round of budget and capital programming. Wow. I could feel the energy around that presentation better than we ever have had presented before. I could hear the cohesiveness of staff bringing things forward. I hung on every word, believe it or not. I think probably everybody did. I just want to go a little bit quickly to healthy and inclusive communities. And I want to put a pin in as we consider social determinants of health, BIPOC, and the teachings from COVID of the gaps in some of our systems. I was of the mind that our government was supposed to help those who needed it the most. And I think about that wave one and in the thick of it when the BLM movement came forward. Now I'm starting to think we need to be so intentional about our investments as we go into this budget. Chair Redman was steadfast and calm and listened to as many people as she could, immediately recognizing the need for a community-led approach to some of the BIPOC issues. And I'm so glad we've struck a task force accordingly. I, for one, am pleased with the pioneering work that was done by our own Colleen in helping us. But I think now it's time to put our money where our mouth is. This task force is going to bring recommendations, and we need to stop the contributions that we make to systemic racism. We need to start really looking at ourselves and how we appropriate our funds and use criteria as methodology in a different way and through a different lens. I just really wanted to highlight that as we go into this budget. You've made mention of it several times, Craig, and I'm really happy to see it. But I really just wanted to put a solid pin in us going forward with great vigor, vim, and intention. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Jowett. Questions or comments? Continuing, Councillor Galloway.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to Craig and staff and Bruce and the whole leadership team for putting together on very short notice, really, and reacting to the pandemic and the reworking that council did back in September, a really comprehensive plan on how we can move forward. I think it was Churchill who said, "Never let a crisis go to waste," and I think we're living that. I really do like some of the new format to this budget, particularly the strategic initiatives. Certainly, what Councillor Jowett was talking about as well, where we can actually do some very strategic, high-level investments in some very, very key areas, including race relations and systemic racism, but also affordable housing and a few others, which are very important as well. So congratulations and thanks to staff in that regard. I do have a question, Craig, in regards to the SRF, and you may or may not be able to answer this, because I'm wondering what other municipalities, particularly those with transit authorities, what position are they in with their SRFs in terms of the carryover? Are they in similar positions? Are we unique? And I ask that question because if we are unique, well then that may or may not be an advantage to us in any negotiations with the province, because the province will come along with a cookie cutter solution. If they come along with one at all, that will be the same for everybody. So if others have already spent all their money and don't have much carryover, it may have one impact with the two senior levels of government. If everybody is kind of in the same position, particular and specifically to the transit funding, which, as you indicated, we do have $8 to $9 million still left in the SRF transit stream, but a date of March the 31st. Are we unique with having that amount of money that needs to be spent theoretically at least by March the 31st? So I'm just curious as to how we are positioned strategically for the ask that I'm sure all municipalities, AMO, and others are going to be making of the province, and maybe to some extent the federal government. Are we in a good position to, are we disadvantaged ourselves to some extent by having the carryover?
Mr. Dyer?
So through Mr. Chair, I would say that we're certainly not disadvantaged. There's no disadvantage here at all. What we've experienced in 2020 is a significant fare revenue reduction, and we, the region, put in place a number of transit-related cost containment measures. Those measures have allowed us to carry over funding to next year, which again, we have to use by March 31st. I would say that my conversations with my colleagues across the province, maybe not surprisingly, there's a range of situations. So, the extreme one might be the TTC, which has, a much higher revenue cost ratio. I think, they're probably getting 75 to 80 cents on the dollar from fare revenue, and ridership, collapsed back in the spring. There's an example where not only was phase one not enough for them, but they'll be applying, obviously, for phase two. And I think there are certain other transit authorities within Ontario that, would be in a similar situation, certainly not to the same order of magnitude. There are others that are similar to us, where cost containment measures were put in place. phase one money was sufficient for 2020 and will be carried over into 2021. So I think there's going to be a range depending on two things, maybe three things: the level of service that's provided, the extent to which fair revenues are relied upon to cover costs, and a third one that I've momentarily forgotten.
What about the municipal stream, Craig?
Yep, municipal stream. I would say again, there's even within Waterloo region, there are some municipalities where the funding that they received for stage one wasn't sufficient, and they've applied for phase two. I think if I recall my numbers right, I think about 25% of municipalities have applied for phase two under the municipal stream. Again, in our case, we had sufficient offsetting savings in certain areas that has allowed us to carry that money forward into next year. And I think there's an example of, had we not taken those cost containment measures back in April and May, we would be in a very different situation with respect to the phase one stream, and have perhaps no carryover or a much smaller amount of carryover, which would have required us to find even more areas to adjust our budget in order to achieve the target that council asked us to. I hope that helps, and if I can find out any specific information from either from the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing or the MTO, I'll do so and report back to council.
That's great. Thanks, Craig.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Galloway. Councillor Verbanovic.
Thank you very much, Chair Strickland, and thanks, Craig and staff, for all the work that's gone into the budget. I think, as we all know, it's been a challenging year, as several people have noted, and we were looking to not only address those challenges, but also make some strategic investments. But while doing that, I think it's also important that we preserve some of the valued services that we know are important to our residents. I've got several questions on about 6 or 7 of the slides, and I'm wondering if we can call up the slideshow again. The first one's on slide 8, and that slide, I believe, referenced a number of the areas where we're looking at doing some new hiring. Public health was one, ambulance services was a second, and Sunnyside was a third. And I believe public health and Sunnyside was referencing COVID-related hires. So I'm wondering, are both of those being looked at from the context of putting them into base, or are they temporary hires? And that is going to leave additional tax room in the future. The ambulance services, I presume, are permanent hires as part of our EMS strategy.
Just a moment, Councillor Vanovic. Yep. We'll get to that slide.
Yep. Slide 8.
So I'm not I'm not sure if I have the right slide here.
Yeah, this is the right one.
Is that the one? Okay.
Yeah, it says 8 on the bottom.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so I think the answer is the additional positions that are being budgeted for in public health, A, are temporary, and B, are funded 100% by the province. And so, assuming we get to a point at some point, hopefully soon, that those additional resources are not needed, they come out of the budget. The funding comes out of the budget. There's no impact overall on the levy.
Okay. So that's true of both the public health and the Sunnyside ones, but ambulance would have an impact on the levy because that's part of our planned growth, correct?
So the changes through you, Mr. Chair, through the changes with respect to paramedic services, I think you have to look at them separately. So part of the increase in paramedic services is additional ambulances and additional paramedics. The costs associated with that service does have a levy impact at about 50% once the provincial funding has been phased in. To the extent that there's additional positions, I'll kind of call them COVID-related positions that we've been using and that we expect to continue to use through much of 2021. Our hope is that those positions are funded by the province again, and when they're not needed, they'll come out and the provincial funding will come out.
Okay, so the report on the 16th will actually give us some detail around that and what's what?
Yes.
Okay, great. If we can slide forward to slide 11. On the housing master plan, and that's certainly one that I'm really pleased to see there and see us setting aside 20 million. I presume when we talk about setting aside money to acquire property, it could mean a combination of either acquiring property or utilizing existing regional lands that potentially may be used for housing?
Yes, absolutely. I think in the information that we'll be providing, we'll highlight the extent to which we already have some lands that could be used, and then the funding, if approved by council, would be to add to that inventory and to make it available for community development of affordable housing.
Okay, one of the areas that I'm concerned about is, I mean, obviously we're undertaking a enormous amount of work in this area, which is welcome and overdue. But it's going to be probably difficult to tackle that with our existing staff contingency. So are we looking at addressing that as part of this going forward?
Yep. If I may, Mr. Chair, I'll ask Mr. Lauckner to respond to that.
By all means.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, absolutely. We've actually gone so far as identifying the roles that would be needed. Project management, as an example. It's a massive portfolio, as you've identified. And to Councillor Vanovich's point, it's not just the region, it's partnering with the area municipalities, which makes it even bigger. So this is something that will be staffed, and that's part of the shifting of staff that Commissioner Albright will talk about in the next budget presentation.
Okay, thank you. And certainly very encouraged to see the notion of allocating some funding for the work of our anti-racism advisory working group. That's going to be important as we move forward. Moving ahead to slide 17. We're on that slide, we're talking about the 41 million in COVID-related costs being part of the budget, and then the cost containment and the amount that we've allowed to carry over. And I think on a later slide, you referenced 7.6 million out of the municipal funding and 8 million on the transit side, which is carrying over into 2021. And I'm just wondering, because I think one of the things, just so that we understand all of this and how it's all interconnected, as part of the budget presentation, will we get a report that looks at sort of all of the COVID-related costs, the parts that we've had, provincial and federal funding from, and so that we understand, clearly how we've sort of come up to this number? Because I think it's important that we understand how these individual pieces are connected. So it's similar to the reports that you did previously, but really just an up-to-date one.
If that's helpful for the members of council in your budget deliberations, then absolutely.
Yeah, no, I think it would be, just so that we understand how we are in the situation, because it is, I think, also important, and this speaks to Councillor Galloway's question earlier, just making sure that you know, we've sort of continued to be true to the processes along the way, and in terms of the negotiations that have happened with the provincial and federal government, and that continue now going forward. And the one thing I would say, and you corrected it in your presentation, but perhaps since these documents form part of the permanent public record, if your slideshows can actually be amended to say federal provincial funding, because without those federal dollars, quite frankly, the restart money wouldn't have happened. The negotiations were with the feds, between municipalities and the feds, and so I think it's just important that our documents reflect that and appropriately acknowledge them. So if you can take note of that. Going to slide 19. On the transit end, and I will say this is an area where I look forward to the report you're going to bring forward, but it is one that causes me some concern, because this is not only, you know, permanently removing out of the budget, not on a one-time basis, but permanently, not only the expansion dollars, which we held off on, and I supported, and I thought it was the right way to do, but it's actually taking existing transit dollars out of the budget, and that becomes a little bit of a concern for me, and so the report is going to be important. I'm cognizant of the fact that our disaggregated data report indicated that it's often folks who are, you know, holding down multiple jobs, who are on the lower end of the income spectrum and so on, who in fact are impacted by COVID. And while I understand the challenges we face, part of the pretense of continuing and getting the transit funding was keeping transit routes going. And so I'm just flagging that this is a area of significant concern for me, and maybe for other members of council as well, as we look forward to this issue. Slide 28, which takes us into assessment growth. And it is a number, and as you say, we don't have the details. It's a number that surprises me as well, considering all the growth going on in our community. Now, we know that some of that won't be reflected until those projects are completed, but there's certainly been a lot of individual family home, residential, and other that has been. Is part of the challenge also that MPAC may not have processed everything? And I understand they recently also made the decision to continue with 2016 values, I believe, as opposed to updating things to 2020 values. So is that perhaps where we're seeing some of the problem?
Mr. Dyer?
So through you, Mr. Chair, I would say that with respect to the second part of your question, the decision to remain with 2016 values will have no bearing whatsoever on the 1.3%. So the numbers that you see on slide 28 are all what we would call, you know, real growth in the assessment base, not growth as a result of the change in the base year. The first part of your question or comment is much more likely to have an impact. Certainly when COVID first hit, there was a time that MPAC staff, I would say, were not out doing, you know, the level or extent of work to pick up a new assessment. I think they, like everybody else, made a number of changes to their processes, and I think in the end we're able to pick up reasonably close to what they had originally estimated. So my speculation, I don't really like to speculate on these things, but we may have experienced a higher than normal year of assessment reductions. So it may not be so much that new growth wasn't picked up, but that there was a higher level of reductions. Now that is purely speculative at this point. The roll itself doesn't actually get returned until the second week of December. So we need the data, and we need some time with MPAC to better understand the significant increases and decreases as well in the roll. And once we have that, we'll have a better idea.
Okay, thank you for that. And last question is on slide 30. You talk about if we were to not look at coming in at zero, but looking at something closer to inflation or below inflation. Those were some options, but this budget is predicated on a number of recommendations from staff. I guess the other reality is, while I respect that, some of those recommendations may be staff's, best recommendations. Council needs to balance that with some of the community perspectives and the things we might hear in the public sessions. Is it? I guess part of the other reality is, if we keep some of those things in the budget that right now are being removed, that could partially be funded through this inflationary amount, correct?
Certainly.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Appreciate again all of the work.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Vanovic, for those detailed questions and informative answers, Craig. Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll try to make my questions brief, but I do want to just thank Mr. Dyer and his team, as well as Mr. Lauckner. I think I would echo Councillor Jowett's comments. I really notice a big difference in how people have been sharpening their pencils and coming up with creative ways and how we can reduce the budget this year. And I think you've done a very good job. I have a couple of questions that I would like to ask Craig, and I guess I was kind of astounded, and just listening to Councillor Vanovic on the our whole transit system. And so the losses were over $19 million this year in fare revenue, and 45% reduction in the number of fares. That's pretty remarkable. Is that kind of what we see right across the whole province, or is that just something that is kind of unique to us? Do you know?
Mr. Dyer.
Well, I can try, and perhaps if Mr. Zink is available, he may have a better perspective than I. Certainly, my conversations with municipalities across the province, again, similar to my answer to Councillor Galloway, municipalities with transit have been the most significantly impacted. The actual impact will vary. Again, depending on the level of service that's provided and the extent of recovery from the fare box. And then I did think of the third one. The third one was the extent of measures put in place from a cost containment perspective. And those three factors will determine the extent of the transit impact. I think at the region, we acted appropriately, we acted quickly. We made changes to reflect the ridership and the situation that we were experiencing, and that has been, quite helpful for us as we go to the 2021 budget. Without putting Mr. Zink on the spot, he may have something better to offer.
Mr. Dyer, and further Councillor Lawrence's point there, this has come up a couple times today. I think it would be beneficial if we. Mr. Zink maybe and his team could do an environmental scan and let us know how areas with higher orders of transit like Region Waterloo have been affected by ridership and decline in revenue, and also what they're considering going forward in 2021, if it's available for service reductions, if any, so we can see what's happening across the province. Mr. Zink, is there anything you'd like to add?
Mr. Chair, Mr. Dyer's covered this very well, I think, from a high level. More some specifics, the greater intensity of transit services and reliance on transit fares, and especially in the larger municipalities, they're seeing revenue losses more significantly than the region of Waterloo, some in the order of 75%. Their ridership has also been impacted as well on that scale. So we are probably have a fairly solid base of 40 to 45% riders that are with us day in and day out, it seems. And our revenues are probably impacted more so based on the college and universities not being in session or on campus at this time. And regarding the environmental scan, we have some information and we'll prepare that for the December 16th date.
Great, thanks. Councillor Lawrence?
Yeah, just to continue, Mr. Chair, I mean, I guess my concern is you listen to the day-to-day discussions about where we are with COVID and where we're close to a lockdown and how the municipalities are. And I think the Ford government today talked about canceling Christmas. So I just wonder, we have a system that hardly anybody's using, or only half the customers are. And I think we should be really looking at the spring and how we can ramp up or improve service as things get better. I know nobody can crystal ball this stuff, but I look forward to the report because I really think that we're in a real catch-22. And when people aren't using the service, but some people do rely on it, we're subsidizing this thing, and the province is subsidizing, and the federal government is subsidizing, and it's something that I think we can't rely on forever. We need to get our own house in order, and we have to be concerned about regional taxpayers and not, heavy subsidies from the province and the Fed. So I look forward to that report, but I think that something has to happen there. I get calls and comments all the time about empty buses, and I think we're making a great effort here, but people are afraid to use the system, and quite frankly, I don't blame them. Right now with the causes of spreads and everything else. The other thing I wanted to comment on was, I know we didn't really touch on, Mr. Chair, that you and I chaired that COVID Economic Recovery Committee, and we had talked about thriving local economies and working with some businesses, and I'm wondering if we could get an update what our strategies are going forward, how we're looking at the thriving economy in the region, not just today, but early next year and through the course of next year. The other question I had, Mr. Chair, was the separated cycling lane pilot that we approved, and that was winter maintenance, and I think that was close to like $900,000. Mr. Dyer, do you know offhand?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think the estimate that had been originally provided to council was about $600,000, and I think the actual for the first winter was under $400,000.
So we leased that, we let that tender this year, and that's going to take place as well. But how do we? I mean, this whole cycling stuff. How do we measure this? Are we going to see if people are actually going to use this through the course of the winter, and what are our options for next year if we don't clear it? I mean, universities aren't in. A lot of students aren't going to school physically. They are from home or wherever. But what is? I mean, maybe it's more of a question for Mr. Schmidt. But how do we measure this stuff? Because a lot of the stuff that we went through with our temporary lanes, people kept asking, how do we measure this? How do we know that people are using this? And, we use some traffic lights and stuff, but I think if we're going to continue doing these kinds of initiatives, we need to have a good way of knowing that they've been effective and that they're worth the money that we're spending on them. So how is a measurement going to take place? I see Mr. Vanderker's on the call. Maybe he can tell us, but I get concerned when when, we're losing money hand over fist, and we're doing things like these. To me, these are almost like a one-offs that, maybe we should be looking at some of these luxurious things that we seem to be doing. And I'm not saying that this is one, but it's just the whole concept of when times were good, we were trying all these different initiatives. Well, times aren't good. And maybe things like this, we should be taking second looks at. I know it's too late, the horse is out of the barn, but maybe for next year or for when we think about other projects like this.
So Jeff, Councillor Lorentz, so your specific question is how are we measuring how the bike lanes are being used?
Well, especially the ones that were, we have the separated lanes. I mean, are people really using them?
Yeah.
We're spending $500,000 to clear them for winter snow.
Yeah.
Are they being used? Is there some way to measure to say, yes, it's worth the while of doing this, or should we be taking a second look at how we do all of this stuff? All
right, Mr. Lauckner.
So I'll attempt to answer that one and then seek guidance from you, Mr. Chair. Councillor Lorentz, I think from a broader perspective, before we get into bike lanes, the approach this year that we took was to focus and align the budget to the strategic priorities. So that was step one. And it speaks to your question, being more intentional about the priorities, being more intentional about what healthy, safe, and inclusive communities mean, being more intentional about what our environmental priorities mean, being more intentional about thriving economy, and so on. This is the first attempt to do that. So to shift the budget and the plan associated with the budget towards that. With that in mind, as we move into future years with this approach, I'd like to think that those decisions are made more often upfront through the budget process, and then we enact things moving forward. I will say that there is a master plan, and I know Mr. Vandekeer or Mr. Schmidt can speak in more detail to that. Again, I think it's worthwhile looking at our master plans as we, again, focus on the 5 focus areas to just do a check-in and make sure that we're aligned with those master plans to the more intentional focus of council as we move forward. So that's a broad answer. On the specifics, I know we're coming back with a specific discussion to a council meeting very soon on cycling lanes. And through you, Mr. Chair, I don't know if you'd like Mr. Schmidt or Mr. Vandekeer to comment further on cycling lanes.
I appreciate it, Mr. Lauckner. I'm just looking at the time. I know we said till 5 o'clock, and I know Mr. Vandekeer and Mr. Schmidt, they have that information, Councillor Lorentz, so maybe we could, if it's satisfactory to you, just have the report come back in terms of the number of folks that are using the cycling lanes. And I think of a particular interest is winter, because of those additional costs for winter maintenance, which have a negative budget impact. Does that work for you, Councillor Lorentz, if it comes back with additional? Okay. All right, that's great. Okay, thank you very much. I don't have any other questions for this afternoon. I just would like to make one comment before we adjourn. And that is, in my opening comments, I was remiss in not thanking the federal and provincial governments, and I thank my colleagues for raising that, and staff. When you look at that spreadsheet and the $62 million we received from federal and provincial governments, we'd be in absolutely terrible financial shape if we did not have that support from higher orders of government. So we can't thank them enough as far as I'm concerned. We all know at the end of the day that those deficits are going to have to be brought back into line, but that's a discussion for after we deal with the pandemic. And that money from those higher orders of government has positioned us to make a budget and craft a budget that is focused on local priorities. So real kudos to our levels of government for that support, and everyone on this call who's been involved with encouraging the government to make those kinds of supports. All right, any other business? Okay, seeing none. Next meeting, December 16th. Wow, that's pretty close to Christmas. Adjourn. Moved by Councillor Erb, seconded by Councillor Foxton. We could vote to adjourn. Okay, that's carried. And I believe we have caucus at 6 o'clock for Regional Council. I'll see everyone in an hour with Chair Redman in the chair. Thanks. Stay in the link. Keep the link live, and we'll see you in an hour. All right, thanks. Bye.